Safely away from Byron's clutches, Annabella confided her worries to her parents.
Annabella and her family were so keen to see this relationship terminated with no blame accruing to her that they used the threat of exposure. It was not his relationship with Augusta per se that threatened to ruin him. His father-in-law also held the trump of enlisting Caroline Lamb, the spurned woman who gave testimony that Byron had told her about his homosexual involvement.
With Caroline's involvement, Byron was in danger of having criminal charges laid against him. He had been rejected by his wife, and it was likely he would be rejected by the rest of elite society. Exile seemed the only escape from the situation, and once again he left the country. By 1816, aged 28, Byron's marriage was in tatters. He had lost both honour and family, and with allegations of incest and homosexuality, he was in danger of losing his life.
He had just separated from his wife under circumstances that were scandalized in society, incest being one rumour, homosexuality being the other, and God knows what else. A lot of things got spread about him, and really, I think he sums it up very neatly. Either I was not fit for England or England wasn't fit for me, so I left.
Byron headed for Europe, seeking an escape from the scandals that surrounded him and the threat of legal action. He settled in Geneva, Switzerland.
Byron tried to portray his exile in Switzerland and his fleeing England in part as a political act, but once arriving in Switzerland, he saw himself, not altogether accurately, as a political exile, of which Switzerland then, as later in the 20th century, was full of political exiles.
Feeling humiliated and unjustly shunned by his aristocratic circles, Byron now tried to find solace in Switzerland's romantic landscape. The self-imposed prisoner struggled to come to terms with his present situation, hoping to escape his pain.
He tried to lose himself in the surrounding countryside, in all its glory and magnificence. And he couldn't. He couldn't do this. He couldn't lose his own wretched identity, is the word he uses.
Byron failed to overcome his torments in Geneva and remained apart from society. However, he found a creative ally in another exile, the poet Shelley.
Byron and Shelley were immediately attracted to each other, and their relationship was enormously fruitful. They found each other to be enormously inspirational, and they really kind of sparked off each other with ideas. And, you know, it seems to be a very intense relationship.
I think that they were very different. Shelley was an idealist and very radical in politics. Byron much more of a realist and a cynic.
Byron and Shelley's meeting was not coincidental. Prior to leaving London, Byron had begun an affair with a young woman, Claire Clairmont, who was Shelley's sister-in-law.
Before they left England, Claire Clairmont was pregnant with Byron's child. She was a young woman attached to the Shelley ménage, a groupie, we might be inclined to describe her today, who simply had to be in the radiant circle of poets in the sense of being like the rock stars of the period.
Claire Clairmont, in fact, was one of the women that she'd written to him as a fan, although there was a relationship through Shelley that he'd known her. He said he'd never loved Claire Clairmont, but what he did say was, well, what do you do with a woman who's a 17-year-old who's prancing about at me at all hours? And the answer was to have an affair with her.
Claire had moved to Geneva with the Shelleys, and although Byron wanted to keep a low profile in Switzerland, it was not to be. Geneva was attracting many English visitors, and his celebrity meant that he was still in the public eye. The relationship between the Shelleys, Claire and Byron was now the subject of huge interest.
Numerous rumours were not only created but exploited, from people looking at the balcony across the lake. And you know, the slightest bit of silk rippling on a line would be something scandalous going on.
boatloads of people were taken on tours around the lake to have Byron and Shelley, these two wicked, terrible examples of humankind, where they were living in sin with their mistresses. And this fascinated Byron to some degree and annoyed him considerably. And eventually, I think that was one of the things that drove him from Geneva. He did not like to become a kind of a figure on the tourist map.
Byron began to hate Geneva and decided to move on, leaving the Shelleys and a pregnant Claire behind. Seeking anonymity, he moved to Italy and was immediately transformed by its hedonism.
Byron had always wanted to go to Venice. He called it one of the greenest islands of my imagination. He also later called it that old sea Sodom.
In Italy, he said that he'd had over 200 women. It was this opportunity to actually escape into experiencing his sexual passions to the full.
It was a grand, decaying, but still magnificent place. It was one of the places he lived actually for longest in his life. He lived there for pretty much 3 years.
When Byron gets to Venice, he is initially overwhelmed by the Italian way of life, and especially its freedom, its sexual freedom. And he did go to town there. And he boasted of it too, of the amount of women he got through. But initially, he really flings himself wholeheartedly into sensual existence. The carnival, where people dressed up, the masking, where you could pretend to be somebody other than you really were.
Byron revelled in the freedom which Venice offered, feeling more at home than ever before. He began work on a new epic, Don Juan, and even started to accept payment for his poetry. As his life became more settled, he also found emotional stability with the 19-year-old Teresa Guiccioli.
He settles down a bit, so with Teresa Guiccioli, he was much more of a stable character, and they had, a very long and kind of happy, well-ish, slightly up and down relationship. Slightly less scandalous, although she was married, so he doesn't quite break that habit.
Although less scandalous, it was still a dangerous relationship, introducing Byron to a radical group of political dissidents.
Italy wasn't free after all, it was ruled by the Austrians, so that Byron, in meeting Teresa Guiccioli, her family immediately seized on him as a great European figure and wanted to draw him into the cause to free Italy from the Austrians.
Byron's association with this cause would prove to be perilous and was about to destroy the peaceful Venetian idyll.